Hello folks, I made you suffer through a video about special effects in dinosaurs, so let's talk about suffering. Now Master Yoda defines suffering as follows. Fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering. But let's look at what the Shambhala Dictionary of Buddhism and Zen has to say about suffering. The word that the Buddha actually used is dukkha. So here's their definition of dukkha. Suffering, a central concept in Buddhism, which lies at the root of the Four Noble Truths. The characteristic of suffering is one of the three marks of existence. Dukkha not only signifies suffering in the sense of unpleasant sensations, it also refers to everything, both material and mental, that is conditioned, that is subject to arising and passing away, that is comprised of the five skandhas, and that is not in a state of liberation. Thus, everything that is temporarily pleasant is suffering, since it is subject to ending. Dukkha arises because of desire and craving and can be overcome by the elimination of desire. The means to bring about the extinction of suffering is shown by the Eightfold Path. The nature of suffering is described in the first of the Four Noble Truths as follows. Birth is suffering, aging is suffering, sickness is suffering, dying is suffering, care, distress, pain, affliction, and despair are suffering. The non-attainment of what one desires is suffering. In short, the five aggregates, or skandhas, connected with attachment are suffering. It's interesting that they list care as one of the elements of suffering, because I just read that cold just now, and was kind of surprised by it, so I had to go look up. If you saw a little jump cut there, it's because I had to go look it up. And there's another version that lists the aspects of suffering, the second set of them, as sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. Whereas Shambhala Dictionary of Buddhism and Zen says care, distress, pain, affliction, and despair. So there's a lot of different translations, I guess, is the message of that. I was asked in a comment under one of these videos if I had overcome dukkha, and I said back to the person who commented, what do you mean by dukkha? And I got an answer, but I wanted to try to address it as honestly as possible. So I've done Zazen for 30-odd years, had a few experiences that were mind-blowing because of it, and so forth. So, has it worked? Have I overcome suffering? Have I overcome dukkha? Well, I don't know. I mean, I imagine there was some suffering involved in sitting through Avengers Endgame, which I mentioned in my last video, so that was a kind of suffering. I suffer from headaches from time to time. I had kidney stones when I was in Frankfurt. Was it last year or the year before? Whatever year that I was in Frankfurt in the summer and it was really hot. So there is pain in my life. There is lamentation and despair and care and all of these things still exist in my life. So have I overcome dukkha? Well, in the sense, if you're imagining that through doing this practice you'll end up in a state where nothing bothers you and nothing affects you and there's no pain and there's no sorrow, it isn't going to happen. I don't really believe that ever happens. It didn't seem to have happened for Nishijima Roshi. It didn't seem to have happened for Tim McCarthy or any of these other teachers who I know. They seem to have, the stuff that we all go through. I think, though, that there is a difference. And maybe this gets at the root of what dukkha really means. The original meaning of the word dukkha, as I understand it, and maybe Sanskrit scholars can debate me on this, but I think it's probably fairly reliable, is that it had to do with the axle on a cart that people use to travel around in, a wooden axle with wooden wheels. And if the axle wasn't quite fitting the hole, I don't want to make an obscene gesture here, but if the axle wasn't quite fitting the hole, you can imagine, that was dukkha. That was the original meaning of dukkha, that it was not fitting, and the wheel therefore was not rolling the way it should, and you were bouncing around all the time, right? So that's suffering. And that's the way words go. Words kind of have an original meaning and then they branch out, and it's kind of interesting if you want to follow that kind of stuff, but that's not what this video is about. This video is about whether there is suffering, and the way I understood dukkha that was explained to me when Tim first brought it up in that Zen class that I took 1,000,000 years ago was unsatisfactory experience. So not exactly suffering, but something a little more general. It's one of these words that doesn't translate all that well. If I have overcome anything, I may have overcome this idea that wouldn't it be better if, I mean, I can still think of it. I can still think, I've got a book that's coming out in October, and I think, wouldn't it be better if instead of selling 5,000 copies, this one sold 10 million copies, and I was as rich as Eckhart Tolle, and wouldn't that be nice? I can have those kind of thoughts. And, I always hope that the next book will sell better than the last one, and I think that's fairly normal. But there's no feeling of like, if only it happened like that, then everything would be wonderful, and this kind of dissatisfaction with my current life. That seems to have been largely alleviated by the practice. Like, whatever situation I'm in, I can find some way to be okay with it, even if by other definitions it's suffering. It doesn't mean I don't get sad or nothing unpleasant or painful or the bug that just flew up my nose. It doesn't mean that these things don't happen, or it doesn't mean that these things have zero effect on me. It's sort of a feeling that I can be okay with whatever comes up. And I don't know that this extends to any possible situation. I can certainly spin out situations and wonder, well, I don't know if I could be okay with that. But so far, except for this fruit fly, so far so good. That things that in the past I would have said, I wouldn't be able to take that, or things I've seen other people kind of fall apart for don't seem to affect me as much. And I think as practice continues, this continues to be the case, that there are more things that are within the realm of what I can stand, and we'll see if it all pans out. I'm not trying to make any great claims, but if you're feeling that this practice is going to kind of magically remove everything that's bad in your life, well, it isn't going to do that. But newsflash, none of the other practices that people tell you are going to do that are going to do that either. So I think this practice is very good for learning to be okay with whatever comes up. To a degree, there's certain things you're going to be more okay with than other things, and that's always going to be the case. I used to have a lot of weird ideas about things that might happen due to practice. I remember reading stories of people who had developed, powers, like healing powers and different, sort of powers and mind control powers. And I can remember being a little dinkus doing zazen and thinking, well, maybe one of these days I'll develop one of those powers, those siddhis, that they're called in Sanskrit. None of that ever happened, and maybe it'll happen one of these days, but it still hasn't happened. And so the idea that you might go through a practice imagining that one day it's going to erase all your suffering and erase all your bad stuff, well, that isn't going to happen. But it does kind of give you a perspective on that stuff that makes it much, much easier to deal with, and that comes from practice. It doesn't come from just knowing intellectually about it. It's not a mental trick. It's not a mind trick. It's not a Jedi mind trick that you find to overcome. It's actually sitting with the dukkha. So you sit quietly with it day after day after day of unsatisfactory experience, and sitting there doing nothing about it. That's what Zazen is. You have unsatisfactory experience and you're not going to do anything about it. And that really helps when things come up that are out of your control and that are bad, you can find this kind of ability you've developed, sorry about the fruit fly, that makes that kind of stuff a lot easier. So that's my message today. I had this notion that I was going to try to do a video every day for a week. I probably won't get one done tomorrow because I got some friends who want to go do some stuff during the day. We'll see. But that's your video for the day. We'll see if I get one up tomorrow. Probably not, but maybe Friday. Anyhow, thanks a lot. There's Patreon and PayPal links below if you want to support my ability to overcome dukkha. Certainly getting donations does help me overcome dukkha, and I really thank you because you guys are my main means of support, and I feel like I don't thank you enough. So thank you, and see you next time. Bye.